with Common Sense for the Commonwealth. It's the John Fredericks Morning Show. Like us on Facebook. Follow John on the new Twitter handle at JF Radio Show. And online, the website, thejohnfredericksshow.com. Listen online anywhere, anytime at washingtontimes.com/listen. And make a note of the new call-in number, toll-free at 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646.
What Kim Jong-un has been choosing to do is provocative, it is dangerous, reckless, and the United States will not accept the DPRK as a nuclear state. We are prepared to enter into a dialogue, negotiation, if they are serious, if they will stop the provocations and engage in a serious discussion.
So much inhumane behavior taking place around the world, and much of it justified as it's a cultural norm.
We see too many countries where women still face violence and abuse. Too many political systems that treat women like second class or even worse.
I want to thank my God. You know, I used to cringe when somebody would say, okay, I want to thank my God. It was at that point, okay, this is getting uncomfortable. But once you've really received God's grace and seen it reflected in others, you cannot stop and stop for a moment and publicly acknowledge that grace.
States need to consider changing the laws so that it allows the firearm to be carried by school personnel.
If it were simple to pass measures through Congress that are very common sense but would reduce gun violence in America, those measures would have passed already.
Whatever you do, if you serve, it shouldn't be hard to get traction back in the civilian workforce. If anything, it should be easier. So that's the first thing we want to do. We owe it to people who've served to make it as easy as we can. They don't want any kind of handout. I mean, but a pathway to success is something that we owe people who have served. That's the first reason that we need to solve this problem.
Now, with Common Sense for the Commonwealth, here's John Fredericks.
Good morning, folks. Again, this is Rob Whitman standing in for John Fredericks here on the John Fredericks Show, Common Sense for the Commonwealth. We appreciate you joining us this morning, and we look forward to getting into our call segment.
Exactly, and as John does continue his spring break, we have renamed the show Congressional Common Sense for the Commonwealth because we're stacked and packed from one end of the show to the other with great representatives, and of course it's great to have you here, Rob, as you represent the 1st District. We're going to open up the phones, folks, and want to hear from you at 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646. It's toll-free from anywhere in the listening area. And if you're listening online out of state, we'd love to hear from you as well. We're going to open up the phones and first talk about the impact of sequestration. Of course, we'll take a call on any subject since this is a rare opportunity for you to talk to Congressman Whitman, but sequestration impacts military in the Commonwealth, Blue Star families, DOD employees, contractors. We want to hear from you about how it's impacted you, layoffs, furloughs, business, however it has affected you. 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646, and I'll put you right on.
Very good. You know, I wanted to touch base a little bit on looking at the issue about defense and the issue about our defense budgeting. You know, we've heard a lot this week about North Korea, and I think that really hits home with folks about what the impacts of these cuts could be on our nation. There was a recent piece by the Heritage Foundation, and it was entitled "The Danger of Defense Cuts: North Korea is Just a Reminder." And you know what it stated there was the bottom line is that as U.S. capability erodes, if we don't properly resource our national defense, that our warfighters are going to be unable to provide the necessary credible deterrence to maintain peace, not just on the Korean Peninsula, but elsewhere around the world, as the U.S. has critical national interests it needs to protect, and especially in face of what we see are emerging threats, whether it's Iran and the emerging nuclear capability there, with non-state actors continuing to try to perpetrate terrorism in other areas of the world outside the Middle East, like Africa. So all those elements, I think, are concerning for us. And then understanding what it takes to keep this nation free. I want to make sure we are efficient in spending those dollars. We are at a time in our national budget where we can't afford to waste a single dollar. We're also at a time where we're going to be paring down the size of our military by 100,000, 80,000 soldiers and 20,000 Marines. We have to get that right. If you look at our nation historically, when we've come out of conflict, we haven't always gotten the reset of our forces right. And where the reset has not gone right is we have lacked in actually training our men and women. We see the issues there that they deal with. In fact, I was meeting yesterday with some folks. One of them was a Korean War veteran. He said, Rob, I don't want us to ever go back to that point. He said, I had to buy my own sleeping bag when I went to Korea. So making sure that we have the resources to assure that our forces have what they need is absolutely critical. I want to make sure that we are getting that to them and making sure that we have the resources where they need to be for our men and women.
All right, let's go to the phones. First up is Mike in Falls Church, listening to us on our flagship WTNT. Mike, you're on with Congressman Rob Whitman. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mike.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Congressman. I heard a key phase in there about efficiency of the spending for the military. I got a problem with that. I enjoy supporting the military. I served in the military. But what I find our military doing is taking positions, especially even in the advertising department with the U.S. Navy, something called the Global Force for Good, which, if you speak to the people in the U.S. Navy, they feel that they're starting to become the humanitarian force. Now, it's okay to send a hospital ship out once in a while to do some facial reconstruction or some eyeglass work, but I don't think that belongs in our U.S. Navy. I think the taxpayer thinks that when they spend money on the U.S. military and within the Department of Defense, we shouldn't just be a global force for good. That's not what the Navy was created for. I think you'll agree, sir, and now I'll take the answer on the air.
I do. Our focus needs to be on our strategic capability to make sure that we are out there keeping U.S. interest maintained throughout the world, making sure we have that defensive capability. The humanitarian effort element, as you said, is important, but it is not the primary purpose of our military. The primary purpose of our military is to make sure we protect this nation, we protect U.S. interests, and we act as a deterrent. Our Navy does a tremendous job with that in being able to project force. The unique element about our Navy, unlike any other force anywhere else in the world, is we can project and sustain operations at sea. So if we need to go someplace, we don't need to have a land-based operation. We can send an aircraft carrier strike group to that area. We can launch aircraft off of there. We can essentially pursue any type of military operation we need to, including Marines.
And their very presence sometimes is a deterrent, like putting a couple of ships in the Taiwan Straits a couple of years ago just to tamp down the rhetoric between mainland China and the Republic of China and Taiwan, that type of thing.
That's right, and sending recently a ballistic missile defense destroyer to Korea to let them know if you do launch a missile, we have a ship that will shoot it down. Yep. So that kind of deterrent that makes those nations think twice, as you said, there's nothing like an aircraft carrier being off the coast of a nation to get their attention.
Hey, Mike from Falls Church, thank you for your service and for your call. We appreciate it. Again, the number is 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646 to be able to talk to Congressman Rob Whitman, who is here guest hosting all day today. And we're keen on the topic of sequestration and its impact. So if you're in the military, a Blue Star family, a DOD employee, a contractor, anyone who has an association with an area that might be affected by sequestration, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely, Steve. Well, it's critical, too, that we understand this. I get a weekly update as the chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee, looking at the readiness of our military across all the different perspectives that we look at in how this nation is being defended. My concern is, as I hear from our military leaders, we start to see the early signs of a degradation of that readiness. Now, I want to make sure, as we've said earlier, that we are efficient in spending those dollars, but we can't forget the basic need in this nation, and that is to make sure that we have a defensive capability to not only deter, but also to act. And it's a great example there in North Korea, as we talked about making sure that we have the ability to act and assuring that as we make decisions about the budget, that the resources are there. There have been a significant amount of cuts, over $700 billion over the past 3 years. and a reduction in force. So we understand that's going to happen as we come out of Afghanistan. The key is let's make sure that we get that right. Let's make sure we have what this nation needs. And if we go too far, you just can't you can't press the reset button. You can't say, whoops, sorry, we made a mistake. We need to go back and do these things differently. We need to get training up to par. We need to make sure that we have the resources we need. We live in a dangerous world. Other folks will try to take advantage of our weakness. And it's unlike when we've come out of previous conflicts where the world has actually been a safer place. Today, coming out of Afghanistan, we see the world around us. It is not a safer place. There are lots of nations and other entities that seek to do us harm.
We do want to hear from you again at 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646. Anywhere in the Commonwealth. If you're listening online in D.C., we would love to hear from you, and I'll get you right on with the Congressman. I want to ask something about the technical aspect of sequestration, which is probably the most painful solution to getting a budget together I've ever heard, and it was meant to be, obviously, as it was set up. But since you cannot direct future Congresses to take particular action, are you able to, in some way, draft legislation that allows the military and its leaders to move line item by line item budgetary elements around in order to take care of our readiness? And since you're on the Readiness Committee, I mean, that should be a key element of something you're concerned about, I'm sure.
It is. And, in the continuing resolution, we moved some money around. We allowed the military to put money into certain categories where they were lacking. So we did provide that flexibility. The military does have the ability also to request what's called transfer authority to be able to move money around in certain accounts. But they do have to get congressional permission to do that.
Is that a timely way to do it?
It is. It is. It's one of the ways to do it. It doesn't take care of all the issues. So if there's not money in a specific account or not money across accounts to be able to move, you still have to have the resources there. So we've taken care of about 2/3 of the needs to move money around with the continuing resolution that recently passed. But still about 1/3 of the issues are just not enough money being there overall in certain elements of the budget. There's only so much you can do to move money around. The other elements of it is just making sure you've got the resources there in total. So we have to look at, what's the bottom line, the real bottom line number that we can live with in the military. I think by any measure, these additional $50 billion of cuts annually, or $500 billion over 10 years, on top of what's already happened, put us in a very untenable position. That's what we're having to deal with today. So as we look at the coming months, we're dealing with putting that $50 billion back in 2014. But the question is what do we do now to bridge between now and September 30th for that?
All right. As we take this quick break, again, a reminder of the phone number, 888-480-5646, to talk to Congressman Whitman. And I want you to think this over as we come back. The effects of sequestration, and you mentioned it in your previous answer, will take effect over 10 years. Are there elements, and we'll get your answer when we come back, are there elements that are permanent in the sequestration instructions that will affect us long term? It is now 7:24 here on the John Frederick Show. Back in a short 2 minutes.
Okay, we on? Well, folks, we knew it was coming. For those who don't know me, this is Pete's Pig Rig. The barbecue smoker Pete Snyder's hauling around Virginia as he's running for lieutenant governor. What? Never heard of a talking barbecue smoker? Ha! Seems old Pete's bold conservative ideas are hitting home. Conservative leaders across the state, Oliver North to Mike Ferris, say Pete Snyder's the best conservative to lead Virginia forward. Makes me proud. Pete's a true outsider. So surprise! All them political insiders will say anything to stop Pete. Emails, robocalls, all the tricks they know. They don't want an outsider crashing their party. So we gotta smoke them out. That's where I come in. If you want to shake things up in Richmond, Pete's your guy. Take it from this ironclad conservative. Pete Snyder for lieutenant governor, proven conservative and world-certified barbecue judge. Yep, you heard me right. All right, Pig Rig out.
Paid for and authorized by Pete Snyder for lieutenant governor.
For over 100 years, Hargrave Military Academy has remained a leader in character development. It's an expectation and a way of life at Hargrave. Character development, academics, and leadership are essential advancements at Hargrave. Through academic learning and cadet leadership, students discover character through their actions. Each month, a character theme is highlighted. Hargrave's April character theme is honesty. Learn how Hargrave's character development, academics, and leadership programs can build his future. Families interested in a structured academic setting can learn more by attending an educational and informative open house at Hargrave Military Academy in Chatham, Virginia on Saturday, April 13th at 12:30 p.m. Call 800-434-2480 for more information. That's 800-434-2480 or visit hargrave.edu. Hargrave Military Academy. Build his future.
Remember, that's only a couple of Saturdays away, Saturday, April the 13th. And as always, a reminder, it is Hargrave, singular, hargrave.edu. It is now 7:26 here on the John Frederick Show, and we're with Congressman Rob Wittman, who represents the 1st District of Virginia. He's our guest host today, and we asked a very key question before we went to the break. Again, we'd love to hear from you at 888-480-5646 from anywhere in the Commonwealth, D.C., if you're listening online. Any topic at all, phones are open. But we asked about the long-term impact of sequestration as the instructions go to at least 10 years out, as we know.
They do, Steve. And where sequestration comes in is it sets the ceiling. In other words, it sets the limit for discretionary spending. So it sets those limits for each year, 10 years out. Now, the question is the folks say, well, can't you set it aside? Well, you'd have to enact legislation that says that we take those limits away. But what you can do in the budgeting process is say we're going to keep those limits, but we can move money around within those limits. So you can say, well, we're going to move some money back into the defense element of that discretionary spending. So what we see this year is the ceiling for spending is $974 billion for discretionary spending. Mm-hmm. For next year in the projected budget, it's $966 billion. So we're trying to get it on a downward trajectory, and that's the ceiling. Now, you can move money around within that, but the sequester sets that ceiling. So that's really what the sequester does. The only way that you can set that aside is to put in legislation to say, no, we are not going to have those ceilings. Now, my concern is this. We have to get on track to reduce these deficits and the debt. If you take away that ceiling, then you have no limit there on where spending goes, and you can't define a trajectory on how we manage this deficit and therefore the debt.
All right, private citizen Rob Wittman, is sequestration the worst idea to come down the pike to handle this kind of spending deficit and debt emergency?
I think it's very irrational. If you look at it, it's indiscriminate. And it's disproportional. The way it ends up on defense, you're putting 50% of cuts into 18% of the budget. And that's on top of previous cuts. So if you look at what we need to do, I have no problem with reducing spending. But let's do it in a thoughtful way. Let's do it in ways that we can increase efficiency. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's so many good suggestions out there, whether it's elements of Simpson Bowles, some of those things I agree with, whether it's findings by a number of the governmental entities that look at the federal budget and where duplication takes place. There's about $300 billion in duplicative programs that we could just go through and combine those things and save a significant amount of money. So, when we see those studies come out, we ought to take those as the basis by which to go forward to manage the budget and to reduce spending.
You know, it says an awful lot when something as impactful as sequestration didn't force the hand of the House and Senate to get a budget done, but it did take something more personal in the No Budget, No Pay Act to get them to the table. That says an awful lot about what goes on up on the Hill. And you're shaking your head so hard, I think I may need to get you a neck brace during the break.
Yes.
Coming up on 5:30 here on the John Frederick Show with our guest host, Congressman Rob Wittman from the 1st District of Virginia. We're so glad to have you here. And our window on the weather is brought to you this hour by air conditioning specialists and our good friends, the owners, Chrissy and Alan Smith. You can expect only the very best with air conditioning specialists. Their promise is to deliver to you the perfect HVAC system with outstanding quality and products and superior knock your socks off service. And take it from me, who hasn't worn a pair of socks since I started on this show in November. It's true. For all your air conditioning needs, go to acspecialists.net, acspecialists.net. 43 degrees and clear this morning, highs staying in the low 50s midday in Virginia Beach. A cold and chilly morning in Richmond and Central Virginia, 32 degrees with highs only in the mid-50s for Richmond. 37 degrees, clear and chilly with highs only in the low 50s in Lynchburg and Roanoke. And 35 degrees, highs in the upper 40s to low 50s in the nation's capital. On the way for us, we will talk to Congressman Frank Wolf, also from Virginia. Common Sense News Time, 7:30, right on the button. Let's say hello one more time to Ken Johnson with our Commonwealth headlines. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning, Representative Rob Whitman. Good morning, Steve. Good morning, everybody. Virginia State Police say 2 people have been arrested for allegedly starting a fire in an abandoned home Tuesday night and are believed to be responsible for most, if not all, the arson fires that have plagued the Eastern Shore in the past 5 months. 40-year-old Tanya Susan Bundick and 38-year-old Charles Smith III are being held without bond in the Accomack County Jail and are scheduled for arraignment today. Smith, who went by Charles Applegate, was a captain with the Taisley Volunteer Fire Department several years ago. Friends and neighbors said Bundick was unemployed. There have been 77 confirmed arsons since November and 2 attempted arsons. About 160 members of the Virginia National Guard are being deployed to Afghanistan. The members of the Emporia-based transportation company will participate in a departure ceremony today at Greensville County Elementary School. The Guard members will train at Fort Hood, Texas for about 45 to 60 days and then deploy to Afghanistan for a year. While in Afghanistan, the transportation company will conduct transportation support operations. When state legislators return to Richmond today to deal with the governor's amendments and vetoes, they're also planning on filling some vacant judgeship slots. The state has frozen a number of vacant judgeships for several years to save money. The budget amendments this year include money to fill some of those vacancies, and Governor Bob McDonnell proposes to fund an additional judgeship in the 15th District, which includes Fredericksburg, Stafford, King George, Westmoreland, Caroline, Lancaster, and Spotsylvania, because that district has a high caseload. A new University of Mary Washington Center for Leadership and Media Studies poll shows Senator Mark Warner with a sizable lead over Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell in a hypothetical race for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Warner, who has said he will seek re-election. Warner received 51% to McDonnell's 35%. The pollsters say that while Governor McDonnell remains popular with Virginians with a 52% job approval rating, most would prefer Warner to keep his Senate seat. McDonnell, by the way, has not indicated any interest in running for the U.S. Senate. Governor McDonnell will join several other governors in China next week for the U.S.-China Governors Forum. McDonnell has said that he will embark on a new economic development trip to China and Japan this month after spending a few days in California working to lure businesses to the Commonwealth. It will mark McDonnell's 8th international trade trip since taking office in January 2010. Apparently, the people who stand to make money from the light rail project the most are getting impatient and have sent a proposal to Virginia Beach officials to extend Norfolk's light rail into Virginia Beach and have it running in 2016. The city has been undergoing a study process to obtain federal funding to extend the light rail, with operations to begin in 2020. The new proposal would extend the system 5 miles to Rosemont Road and would be operational by 2016. The funding method has not been identified. City staff will review the proposal and report back to City Council. The proposal came from a group that includes former Hampton Roads Transit President and CEO Philip Schuchert, as well as major contractors and consultants on the Norfolk system. A Hampton Roads Transit consultant has previously estimated it would cost more than $800 million to extend light rail to the oceanfront. State and local news brought to you by the Chris Weaver Real Estate Team, your Virginia real estate leader, recognized by the Wall Street Journal as a top 100 team of all real estate teams across the country. Buying, selling, or leasing, get it done right by the people that do it right. Chris Weaver, chrisweaver.com, KRISweaver.com.
With common sense for the Commonwealth, it's the John Fredericks Morning Show. Like us on Facebook. Follow John on the new Twitter handle @JF Radio Show. And online, the website, thejohnfredericksshow.com. Listen online anywhere, anytime at washingtontimes.com/listen. And make a note of the new call-in number, toll-free at 888-480-JOHN. That's 888-480-5646. Now, with common sense for the Commonwealth, here's John Fredericks.
Good morning. This is Rob Whitman sitting in for John Fredericks today, who is on spring break this week.
And as John continues his spring break, we have renamed the show the Congressional Edition of Common Sense for the Commonwealth, and we welcome in Congressman Frank Wolf, representing the 10th District, to the program. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Good morning, Congressman Wolf. This is Rob Whitman. I'm going to ask, first of all, is it okay if I call you Frank on the air?
Yes, it is, Rob. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, okay.
Well, Frank, thanks so much for joining us this morning. You know, I wanted to start off and highlight your efforts through the years to really focus on our federal budget and getting it back into balance, back into control. You've been a real leading voice in that effort, and I wanted to get your perspective on how you've seen the development in this budget debate as we've seen it unfold here recently, and what your thoughts are on where we need to go to get our federal system into balance.
Well, I think the country's in trouble. We are broke. We are about $16.5 trillion in debt. We borrow 41 cents or 42 cents now for every dollar we spend is borrowed. A large portion of it is borrowed from China. In about 10 or 12 years, every penny we take in will be from tax revenue, will go from Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. So we're in trouble. I think, I'm concerned. My wife and I, we have 5 kids. We have 16 grandkids. I am really concerned that the nation is facing a crisis that if we don't deal with it soon, we're not going to be able to deal with it. That's why I think at the federal level, the Ryan budget is the way to go. We've got to put everything on the table. But I believe that ultimately, in order to resolve this, we're going to have to do something bold, similar to the Simpson-Bowles Commission. We're going to have to look at everything, and we're going to have to bring in additional revenues by closing tax loopholes, but we're going to have to look at everything. Simpson-Bowles calls for instance, reforming the entitlements, Rob. It basically says, if you're 51 years old, there'll be no additional impact with you with regard to Social Security. If you're 50, you'll have to work another month before you retire. If you're 40, you'll have to work another 6 months. If you're 30, go on down to when you're 18, you'll have to work another 2 years. But when I go into all the high schools in my district, from Northern Virginia out into the Shenandoah Valley, for the last 4 years, I've been asking the kids, how many of you believe the Social Security system is sound and will be there when you retire? And in the last 4 years, not one kid has raised their hand. So they all know more, frankly, more than the administration, more than the Congress. So I think we're going to have to do something bold where the country is really going to be facing a crisis that I think is going to be very hard to get out of.
Well, Frank, I agree. I think those issues are so big and so overwhelming in the size of this deficit and this debt. And I agree with you. The young folks get it. They understand how debilitating this debt will be, not only to this nation, but to their generation. So just as you said, both of us have children and grandchildren, and we're very concerned about what this means for them. And I wanted to then lead into your leadership role on the Appropriations Committee, where you're chairman of the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee, and you're right there in the heat of things when it comes to appropriations. And I know you're beginning the process of developing the appropriations bill based on the budget that passed out of the House. Talk about what are your priorities there in the Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee as we undergo this appropriations process?
The Appropriations Committee and my subcommittee, we have cut more money, frankly, than any other committee in the Congress. I mean, the Appropriations Committee, under the leadership of Hal Rogers, has made dramatic impact on a number of programs. We've abolished a number of programs. But for this year, the priorities will be, one, on investing in math and science and physics and chemistry and biology, making sure that the National Science Foundation has the resources the same way with regard to NASA, because we have to create jobs. We're in competition with China. We're in competition with Singapore. We're in competition with nations all over the world, and we have to make things in the United States. Secondly, we're going to look at heavy into what we call manufacturing. The Department of Commerce comes under our committee to see what we can do to bring back manufacturing here in the United States in a much more aggressive way. If you have an iPhone, it's made in China. If you have an iPod, it's made in China. If you have an iPad, it's made in China. Those things have to begin to move back here into the United States. Another area we're going to begin to look at is in the whole area of what do we do with regard to the prisons? We are now imprisoning and put people in prison more than almost any other country other than China. We're looking at doing a national commission to look at what can we do to reform the prisons. One, to make sure that when we put people in prison, there is rehabilitation, there is restitution, there is a change in the life. Secondly, we got to bring jobs into the prisons. Most men in prisons are not working. In the federal prisons, they're doing nothing. And so what we want to see is to bring about a program whereby goods that are no longer made in the United States, that are manufactured outside, can start being manufactured in American prisons. For instance, Rob, there's only 2 baseball cap manufacturers left in the United States.
Wow.
Only 2. Every baseball, you know how many baseball caps we all have in our house, our high schools, and places that we work, the teams, the football teams, the baseball teams. The Department of Commerce, the Department of Justice, all these departments are buying the baseball caps outside the United States. You just saw the other day that the border crossing people and the borders and customs are buying the uniforms in Mexico. Those uniforms ought to be made in the United States. So anything that is no longer made in the United States is made outside of the United States. We're going to start having the Bureau of Prisons look at seeing if we can manufacture them here. One, it would save money. 2, you're not in competition with any American job because these are jobs that are no longer in the United States. 3, you're giving these men and women in prisons skills and things like that whereby they can, whatever they earn, they can save and send to their families. 2, they can use to buy in the canteen in the prison. And 3, about a third of it can go for restitution. If they commit a crime, can go back to the people they committed the crime against. So we're looking at that. Lastly, we're looking at making sure that the FBI has the sufficient funds with regard to cyber, because, you know, every American company just about has been hit by cyber attacks, and also in the area of terrorism and counterterrorism to make sure the Bureau has the necessary resources. They're sort of the priorities that we're going to be dealing with this year.
Well, I know that cybersecurity is extraordinarily important. When folks ask me what keeps me up at night, I said the cyber threats that this nation faces, whether it's to our national defense or whether it's espionage, industrial espionage, and you pointed out a lot of those things, and you've been a leading voice as to what impact that cyber threat is to the United States, especially from China. But let me go on and talk about another issue. You've been a leading voice in Washington on Benghazi and the tragedy that occurred there in Benghazi, and what we need to do as a Congress to make sure we do more to investigate that, to interview the folks that are involved in that. As you know, just recently, the United States government employees and personnel involved in this, we know more about those individuals, and we want to make sure we get information from that. You've been a leading voice there and have really been a leader there on Capitol Hill to try to bring those elements together. You've got a bill in that says, let's have Congress, have the Speaker appoint a joint select committee to investigate that. Give us an update on where that effort is, where your bill is, and where you see things going, and making sure we get the truth out of what happened there in Benghazi.
Our bill to create a select committee has 65 co-sponsors as of now. We're picking up 1 or 2 every day. Secondly, the attack on the American consulate in Benghazi was really an attack on the United States. We lost 4 people were killed. There were a number of wounded. In fact, there's still a wounded person. We're beyond 6 months, still a wounded person who is being treated out at Bethesda Hospital. We have never interviewed any of the people, never had them under subpoena, who were there, who were evacuated, that got out. So far, we have failed. We have failed to fundamentally get the information for both the American people and the Congress. There was a person who was involved in the Benghazi attack, who was Tunisian, who was picked up in Tunisia. We sent the FBI out to interview him. The FBI had to stay on the ground for 5 weeks, Rob, 5 weeks before they could interview him. And we give the Tunisians $300 million a year of foreign aid. They couldn't get to see him. They then left. A group of us then said, if that's the case, we're going to cut off the foreign aid to Tunisia. The Tunisians allowed the FBI team to come back in the country. They only had them for 3 days, for 3 hours, and then they released them And now we don't even know where that guy is. Here's a guy who had information, who was involved in the attack on the Benghazi consulate, and we can't even now find him. Egypt. I was in Egypt 3 weeks ago, and we gave a letter to the Egyptian government. There is an Egyptian who was arrested by the Egyptian authorities. He has information about the Benghazi attack. They will not allow the FBI to interview him. I mean, Kerry just 2 weeks ago had said he was going to give the Egyptians $250 million. In the last, since Camp David Accords, we have given the Egyptians over $50 billion, billion dollars, and they will not allow us to interview him. So I think we need a select committee. We need to have people from the Judiciary Committee, the Government Affairs Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and there has to be the ability to subpoena people. Now, when you subpoena somebody, that offers protection. There are federal employees and others who would like to probably come in and testify, but are afraid that they will lose their jobs if they do. To date, I believe that Congress has failed. And you're now seeing a situation. Hillary Clinton has central-left government. Panetta has central-left government. We do not know the answers to most of the questions. In fact, there are so many questions, and none of the survivors have been interviewed. None of them had been interviewed under oath. So what we have now is 65 people who have said, we want a select committee, and we're going to continue to push. And given an opportunity, I'm going to offer that amendment on the floor. Short of that, Rob, we're not going to find out what went on.
Well, Frank, I tell you, those efforts are critical, and to get to the root of the cause behind this, to understand where the responsibility lies, and to make sure that this never happens again. And I really appreciate your leadership there. It's been absolutely fantastic, and I know that you've been passionate in this fight, not just on Benghazi, but also making sure that we have balance in that federal budget. So, Frank, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. Keep up the great work there, and look forward to seeing you when we get back in Washington next week.
Rob, good to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Go. Congressman Frank Wolf from the 10th District of Virginia. By the way, that stretches from McLean to Winchester. It's home to some of the world's leading internet and high-tech companies, thousands of federal employees and other professionals, and the best part of his district, those great apples and peaches that he provides from the Winchester area, the best in the world. Absolutely. For more information on Congressman Wolf's work, go to wolf.house.gov. Always glad to have him on. And we're going to take a short break here. Back in a short 90 seconds on the John Frederick Show. More to come here at 7:53.
Hi, I'm Mike Watson, president of CatLab Accredited Calibration Laboratories. If your job is to ensure the integrity of instrumentation in your facility, you know the importance of a reliable calibration lab. Your company is serious about quality and compliance and relies on your expertise for both. So when it comes to the accuracy of your test equipment, you can rely on us. CatLab is accredited, prompt, and local, and since 1989 has partnered with manufacturers around the globe. Built by technicians for technicians. Visit CatLab at catlab.net.
Courage. It's what separates those with experience, convictions, and fresh ideas from lifelong politicians who say one thing and do another. My name is Jean Marie Davis, and I am a candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia. Both in the House of Delegates and the State Senate, I defeated the Democrats in a heavily liberal-leaning district in Fairfax County by taking bold, courageous positions and solving intricate legislative problems, all while maintaining a 100% pro-life and pro-business voting record. A member of Governor McDonald's cabinet, I directed his Washington office where I worked to make sure that directives from Washington never infringed upon Virginia's states' rights. I am the most electable conservative candidate for lieutenant governor and will add strength and diversity to the ticket with Ken Cuccinelli and would truly appreciate your support. Please go to my webpage at jeanmarie4lg.com. That's Jeanmarie, the number 4lg.com for more information and to sign up to be a convention delegate. I'm Jean Marie Davis, a candidate for Lieutenant Governor, and my campaign paid for this ad.
The John Frederick Show at 7:55 here on Wednesday, April the 3rd. This portion of the program brought to you by Ending Spending, focused like a laser beam on finding solutions to the nation's crippling fiscal and debt crisis. Ending Spending strongly supports Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli for governor and entrepreneur and businessman Pete Snyder for lieutenant governor. two folks they label as strong, unwavering fiscal conservatives who will move Virginia forward, expanding the economy and creating jobs. To learn more, visit endingspending.com. That's endingspending.com, and that message was paid for by endingspending.com. And as we come back here, Congressman Whitman continues as our guest host, and I believe we have a phone call. Let's hit that real quick before we
yes.
move. Oh, I guess not.
Uh-oh.
Wasn't patient. Maybe his phone bill got sequestered as well. Talk about Benghazi as a follow-up to what Congressman Wolf just told us.
Well, there's deep concerns. Just as Congressman Wolf pointed out, there are folks that need to be interviewed that were there, injured in that tragic event. Well, we need to learn what went on. I think there's a deep sense of concern on Capitol Hill on both sides of the aisle that we're not being told the full story about the decision-making that led up to this. How could these pleas go unanswered? What happened that day with people's attention to this matter? Was the U.S. military engaged? Who made the request? What ultimately happened with there being no response? Mm-hmm. There's so many unanswered questions, and it is important to understand that. It's important to make sure we understand what happened, why it happened, and who is going to be held accountable, because we want to make sure we avoid this in the future, but we also want to make sure, too, that folks that are part of this decision-making are held accountable. And I think that's absolutely critical. As I hear from folks, they talk at length about making sure that we get to the bottom of this. So, Frank has pointed out, I think, very eloquently where we need to go, and he's led the effort to make sure that we have that Joint Select Committee, which is really an elevated effort by Congress to say we're going to focus totally on this, bring together all the resources of these other committees to go ahead and do that. So,
all right,
Steve?
Quickly before we run out of time, Bernie is on the phone for Congressman Whitman. Go ahead. We've only got about a minute.
Good morning, Bernie.
Hey, Congressman Whitman, you've been a great guest host. Really don't miss John that much. No, I'm kidding.
No, we want John back.
Do we? Have we taken a vote on that? Okay.
That's right.
Quickly with your question.
Just quick question. I'm concerned about this immigration, this Gang of 8 coming out of the Senate, not going through the deliberative process, subcommittees and committees, and just wanted to get your comment on that.
Sure. Well, I want to make sure that the immigration bill that comes out does make its way through committees. It's going to come out on the Senate side, it appears. That bill will have to go through committee before it comes to the Senate. Of course, then it has to come back over to the House side and go through the process on the House side. So I'm like you. I want to make sure that bill gets a full vetting to make sure that all the different elements of immigration reform are there. I think we all want to make sure we see immigration reform. It's key, as you said, Bernie, to make sure we do it the right way. I met with some folks yesterday that had some great ideas about how do we put all these pieces together to make sure we're doing the right thing. Not just something, but doing the right thing.
And as we look ahead to the 8 o'clock hour, we will welcome the governor of the great Commonwealth of Virginia, Bob McDonnell. Think about this. The efforts to bring the FBI headquarters into the Commonwealth. We want to talk about that in the next segment with the governor, as well as everything that's going on in the special session today, commonly referred to as the veto session. We hope we'll have more success than that name indicates. But that, along with Representative Bob Goodlate, who will be with us here on the program at 8:40 as well. This is the John Frederick Show with guest host Congressman Rob Whitman from the 1st District here in Virginia. It is now 7:59 on the John Frederick Show.